Hey class, I just finished grading Anakin's case quiz, and I thought this might be a really good opportunity just for me to give you a brief overview of what the clinical picture looks like for several different depressive disorders. And you'll notice this when you're in the field, and it's kind of hard to imagine it before you're seeing it to understand it. But if you think of it this way, that in the middle of the screen here, we have a line of functioning that occurs for every human being related to their mood. And on that line of functioning, you're going to have little blips, ups and downs. Sometimes you're going to feel a little low for a while. Maybe you have a loss of a pet and it might go a little lower than a little blip. But over time, you'll see that really becomes an average on that line that goes through the middle of the screen. That most human beings don't have high, huge, elevated times that are sustainable, and most don't have really low as well. So when you think about these disorders, major depressive disorder, cyclothymia, dysthymia, as well as bipolar, they have different characteristics that we look for when we're hearing the client story or when we're observing a client, and they're really distinctive. So if you think of that line going through the screen, a bipolar disorder person will go very, very high. There's usually you only need one manic episode, just one, to justify that disorder or that diagnosis of that disorder. You're going to see a very high, and then you're going to have very steep lows, and you'll see this really big change from very high to very steep lows. And again, it could just be one high and then sustainable low periods after that. But that manic episode really does make a difference. Whereas cyclothymia is along that line, you're going to have this wavy line of constantly ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. Not real super high or super low, but you're going to have this cyclical up and down. For every good thing that happens, you're going to have this period of depression, another feeling of feeling pretty good, and then feeling low. That's cyclothymia. And you're going to see different cycles. If you think about premenstrual dysphoric disorder, that's only when the client is experiencing menses, which is monthly, right? So you see that this is cyclothymia, but it's only a down during that time of the month. And otherwise, they're staying at that line that goes across the screen. Major depressive disorder, you're going to have a person that can operate above that line, feeling pretty good, never real highs, but usually around that line, and then they have a deep crash. I mean, a deep crash, and they are in that crash for a while. They can't get out of bed. That observable physical change is almost always consistent. You're hearing, very strong thoughts of suicide or of death in general. Fatigue to the point that they can hardly move. It's really that bad. It's a huge interruption. But then at some point, and sometimes there's no trigger, there's no understanding it, they will come back up to feeling like normal again. And that may continue for a while before they crash again. And those crashes are so severe that medication sometimes is the only way to get them out of it. Persistent depressive disorder or dysthymia is really unique, and I'm so glad that we have this opportunity to think about Anakin, because he is operating below that line. So if the line of quote unquote normal existence for him before he left his mother to go become a Jedi, ever since then he's been a couple of deviations below that, just generically miserable, right? His wavy line, if there is one, is below normal all the time. And this is why dysthymia is so tragic and catastrophic, because the client never gets a break. With bipolar, with major depressive disorder, and even with cyclothymia, you get a break from that just misery, right? But dysthymia is constant. It's a constant misery that is hard to quantify, because they're going to work, they're going to school, they're engaging relationships, but they're just never able to break free of that enough to get to a normal level of functioning where they don't feel this oppression, this cloud hanging over them all the time. So there is that distinction. Also, age is a big factor. Older people do suffer from dysthymia, but oftentimes you're going to see this in teenagers and young adults. And quite frankly, it's very dangerous because sometimes suicide is considered not because they're so depressed, but because they just can't take that blah feeling anymore. They can't take just the irritability anymore. So hopefully this has made sense for you. It was a little tricky, I'll give you that. Purposely, even though Anakin was eating more than he was often eating more than he wanted. It wasn't every day. It wasn't as consistent as you would need um, to satisfy criteria A3 for a major depressive episode. That I know that was tricky. Also, he is not he did not express guilt about leaving. He felt hopelessness, but not guilt. And that makes a big difference. So we want to make sure that we're really being careful about how we're looking at things. But quite frankly, a diagnosis of major depressive disorder for Anakin would not be catastrophic. Over time, you would see that he doesn't necessarily get to the bottom of the barrel. And if you're familiar with the story, the Star Wars trilogy, he really is a resilient character. He turns evil, which is, not a good thing, but he's able to function. He never shuts down, if you will, which is a curious way of looking at diagnosis. So hopefully this little review is going to be helpful to you. I don't want you to feel like you're stabbing in the dark as a result of the Anakin case quiz, and feel good about the fact that you recognize there was a depressive thing going on here, because that's really the biggest important part of this case quiz. So good job, guys.